In the beginning, Melkor unsuccessfully searched the void for the secret fire. This led him to rebel against his creator, seeking dominion over Ada. He could not create life, but he could corrupt and seduce it. During the Music of the Ainur, he seduced some Maiar to his cause, who took the form of demons. He destroyed the two lamps, and did such terrible damage to Ada that it was marred forever. His rebellion would engulf Ada and introduce to its inhabitants the horrors of war. To win this war, Melkor would rally armies, forge terrible weaponry, and divide his enemies so he could conquer them. In our previous videos on the armies of Middle-earth, we explored the arms, armor, and military strategies of the races of men, elves, and dwarves. In this video, we will explore the composition of the dread legions of the Black Foe of the world. We're exploring Tolkien's finished world, but it's all the work in planning, writing, and publishing that brings these worlds to us, and for that, allow us to show you our sponsor, World Anvil. World Anvil is a complete package for building creative fiction projects, especially focusing on tabletop adventures like Dungeons & Dragons. Use it to build a wiki-like database containing all the information in your world, both for your own use as a writer and for use by others coming to collaborate or explore your work. There are timelines, relationship diagrams, interactive maps, and other tools. But an underrated feature is being able to whiteboard your plans as the writer or game master, so that you can handle the task of making your stories, worlds, characters, and adventures the best they can be. Then, when it comes to playing, World Anvil tracks data live as you play to make it easy, and supports loads of different tabletop rule sets. You can lay out gear or NPCs from your database for all to see, and can do quick searches for lore when something comes up. And even better, your players can too, bringing everyone deeper into the adventure. Or if you're simply writing prose, use it to become immersed and wizened in the ways of your world, so that your writing will do the same for your audience. Check out World Anvil via our link in the description. If you use our code WIZARDS, they'll give you 51% off a yearly subscription. Melkor first constructed Utumno under the Iron Mountains, where the light of Iluin and Ormal were dim and cold. His first followers, the Umayyad, took the forms of demons. These followers included the shapeshifter Sauron, Balrogs such as Gothmog, and perhaps even Ungoliant the Great Spider. Melkor poisoned Ada with his hate, choking it and causing beasts to become monsters. During the First War, Melkor destroyed the two lamps, and Ada was forever marred. The Valar created the two trees, while Melkor, attended by his Balrogs, scoured Middle-earth, corrupting and breeding monsters. During his roamings, he constructed a secondary fortress, Angband, whose command he entrusted to his lieutenant, Sauron. Throughout his travels, Melkor captured elves, corrupting and breeding them into orcs as a form of mockery. He commanded some of his Umayyad servants to direct these orcs, and these Umayyad took on orcish shapes, known as Baldogs. These Baldogs acted as orc captains who could not be slain, and would reappear in battle throughout the centuries. Fearing Melkor's evil deeds, the Valar came to Middle-earth in YT 1090, beginning the War of Powers. The Balrogs fought with their tides of flame, but were slain as Tulkas wrestled Melkor out of Utumno and bound him in the chain of Angainor. Though imprisoned, Melkor's lieutenant Sauron and his surviving forces hid in the deepest chambers of Utumno and Angband. Countless of Melkor's corrupted elven children also fled east, becoming the Eastern Orcs. Awaiting their master's return, they bred in secrecy, replenishing their numbers. Meanwhile, Melkor spread lies in Valinor to divide his enemies. In YT 1495, Melkor and Ungoliant destroyed the two trees of Valinor, then slew Finwë and stole the Silmarils. This act cast a deep divide amongst the elves, as Fëanor, unknowingly, would aid Melkor's designs. Following this, Melkor became Morgoth and returned to Middle-earth to wreak havoc once more. Morgoth was rescued from Ungoliant by Gothmog and other Balrogs, after which he returned to Angband with the Silmarils in his crown. Following his return, Morgoth's military would face a long series of battles known as the Wars of Beleriand. His military was both quantitatively and qualitatively formidable. Morgoth's military units were measured in hosts, armies, legions, companies, and bands. Morgoth existed at the top of the military hierarchy, holding the rank of Dark Lord. Under him were the ranks of Marshal, Lieutenant, Captain and Chieftain. Orcs made up the majority of his army formations, but there were also wolves and wolf riders who acted as separate formations and acted as the equivalent to the horseback cavalry seen in the armies of men and elves. The orcs in Morgoth's army were led by orc chieftains, bulldogs, balrogs and dragons. Orcs were typically smaller than men, strong but crooked in frame and bow-legged. They were powerless to resist the domination of Morgoth and were willing to die for him on command. Thus they were very fanatical and effective in military operations. Trained in combat by Morgoth and his servants, they fought recklessly and ferociously. They could also create clever things and are ample tunnelers and miners. Orcs were unafraid of fire, but unable to operate as mariners, for they feared the sea. Consequently, throughout his wars, Morgoth would not have any naval forces. Tamed wolves, which were used as steeds by the orcs, acted as cavalry and scouting units for Morgoth's forces. Sauron also twisted beings into werewolves, and often took on the shape of a great wolf himself. The first werewolf was Draugluin, an evil spirit imprisoned by Sauron, who would sire Khaz'roth, the greatest and most powerful wolf to ever live. Khaz'roth was personally fed elven and man flesh by Morgoth himself. After capturing Minas Tirith in FA 457, Sauron renamed it Tolin Garhoth, the Isle of Werewolves. Wolves were important reconnaissance units, but even better were vampires. Sauron could take the form of a vampire and employed the services of a vampire servant, Thuringwethil, who acted as a messenger in the form of a giant bat with great-fingered wings. For logistical support, Morgoth created beasts of horn and ivory that could have carried supplies, aided in construction and in forging. For heavier units, Morgoth corrupted and bred trolls, hulking twisted creatures made in mockery of the Ents. Gothmog, the Lord of the Balrogs and High Captain of Angband, had a troll guard. Trolls towered 12 feet or more and were immensely strong. To further divide his enemies, Morgoth managed to seduce the faithless Easterlings to his camp. Led initially by Ulfang, the Easterlings acted in an auxiliary role. Though not as formidable as the Men of the West, they provided extra units for Morgoth's armies at little cost. For weapons of mass destruction, Morgoth developed dragons. These were winged or wingless beasts, capable of fire-breathing. Glaurung, a wingless, fire-breathing Uriloki, was the first dragon. Morgoth also developed cold drakes that could not breathe fire in the late First Era, such as Scutha. Winged dragons included Smaug, Gostir, and the largest dragon to ever exist, Ancalagon the Black. Dragons were enormous, extremely strong, and naturally armored. They were intelligent, with some capable of speech and mental magics. Glaurung, for example, had hypnotic powers, which he employed when leading the armies of Morgoth. Dragons were the juggernauts of the Dark Lord's forces, serving as his primary siege breakers. Morgoth constructed Utumno as his general headquarters, where many of his hosts resided. It was a stronghold that enabled him to work secretly. Once uncovered, he constructed Angband, initially as an outpost and armory. After the creation of the orcs, Angband presumably became the evil creature's main arsenal. Orcs by themselves could forge all manner of weapons and instruments of torture, but they also captured slaves to make things for them as well. Orcs preferred curved scimitar-like swords and bows of horn. They poisoned spear tips and arrowheads and forged armor and shields. Beleg Strongbow once asked King Thingol for swords of worth that could penetrate orc armor. From this we can extrapolate that orcish metal must have been of decent quality. Unique to the forces of Morgoth and later Sauron was the use of engines of war. There are no detailed descriptions of these engines in the First Age, but it's said Morgoth had smiths, miners and masters of fire who erected great engines against the walls of Berthombar, Eglarest and the Tower of Barad Nemes. Orcs were very capable tunnelers and miners, only surpassed by the dwarves. Thus it is reasonable to presume that they made for excellent sappers as well. Morgoth's greatest weapon was fear, instilling terror into the Free Peoples by using the concept of darkness to coax people towards him for protection. As Melkor told the First Men, "Greatest of all is the dark, for it has no bounds. I came out of the dark, but I am its master. I will protect you from the dark. which else would devour you. The shroud of ignorance and misunderstanding that burdened the Free Peoples was a vital weapon harnessed by Morgoth to divide and conquer. Divide and conquer was Morgoth's primary strategy to overcome his enemies. Through the darkening of Valinor, Melkor had stirred the hearts of the Noldor to rebel against the Valar. Upon taking the physical form of Morgoth, the Valar became unwilling to face him in a physical battle, thus he had effectively neutralized them for the time being. From the very onset of his rebellion, Morgoth utilized the fear of darkness to divide the Free Peoples, causing a rift. Many were dissuaded from journeying west into Beleriand, joined Morgoth, or stayed out of the war. Once Morgoth felt his hosts were strong enough, he unleashed the Wars of Beleriand, and his opening action was to divide the Sindar realms. To that end, Morgoth unleashed two great hosts of orcs into Beleriand. His western host cut off the lines of communication to Círdan's Falathrim, and his eastern host to Denethor's Lyquendi. This forced King Thingol in the center to dispatch his army to save the Lyquendi north of Andran. As a result, the Falathrim were overwhelmed, pushed and pushed to the edge of the sea, and would only be saved by the coming of the Noldor. After losing Denethor, the Lyquendi pledged to never again participate in the wars of Elves and Morgoth. Thus Morgoth had effectively neutralized one enemy. The dwarves of Belegost and Nogrod assailed Morgoth's retreating forces, but he paid little attention to them, as they were effectively performing a policy of isolation. After his defeat, Thingol withdrew his people into Doriath, under the girdle of Melian, allowing Morgoth free movement around Beleriand, except in Felas and Doriath. Morgoth's spies noticed Fëanor's exiles landed at Lamath, isolated from the group led by Fingolfin. Seeing an opening, the Dark Lord chose to preemptively strike the Noldor while they were still divided and had not set up a proper defensive camp. Morgoth unleashed a host of orcs and wolves, taking the Noldor by surprise. However, the Noldor were still empowered by the light of Valinor and were thus able to rout his force. Consequently, the Dark forces besieging the Falathrim were forced to lift their siege to aid the army retreating from the Noldor, but they were ambushed by a force led by Celegorm near Ithel. As the Noldor pushed closer to Dor Daedaloth, Morgoth unleashed Balrogs from Thangorodrim. Fingolfin's group fought their way to the gates of Angband, but the Noldor did not have the strength to break through. Fëanor died fighting Gothmog, and the Noldor were forced to withdraw. Morgoth attempted to deceive his enemy by offering terms and the surrender of the Silmaril. Maedhros feigned terms and agreed to meet for treaty talks, but Morgoth abused this flag of truce to slaughter Maedhros' company and take him hostage, demanding the Noldor depart Beleriand and give up their war. Hoping he had divided the Noldor from the Sindar, Morgoth awaited their answer, but their answer was a siege of Angband. Morgoth had failed to divide the Noldor and Sindar. Now the Dark Lord was surrounded, with Fingolfin and Fingon guarding Ered Wethrin and Barad Ithel, Finrod and Orodreth guarding the pass of Sirion from Minas Tirith, Angrod and Aegnor guarding Dothonion, Celegorm and Curufin guarding the land between Aros and Kelon. To make matters worse for him, Maedhros escaped prison and set up a vigil at the marshes north of Himring, while Maglor kept watch over the northern hills of Gleon, and Caranthir guarded Ered Luin. In addition, the new hidden kingdoms of Gondolin and Nargothrond joined Doriath. To locate and destroy the hidden kingdoms, Morgoth needed to break the siege. Morgoth's intelligence indicated that the Noldor were too preoccupied with domestic affairs to prioritize their military ones, so he attempted sorties against the perceived weaker parts of the siege line. He sent a host of orcs against Dothonion with a smaller host through the pass of Sirion and Maglor's Gap. However, Morgoth's intelligence proved to be bad, for the forces of Maedhros and Fingolfin counterattacked from the west and east, using a hammer and anvil maneuver. Morgoth's two hosts were routed in front of Thangorodrim, seeing bands flee into western and eastern Beleriand only to be hunted down. After this setback, Morgoth looked to Hithlum and decided it might be weaker than the realm of Maedhros. He unleashed a small number of orcs to assault this position in FA 155, but Fingon's spies saw them crossing the Firth of Drengist and ambushed them. The orcs were driven into the sea. After yet another defeat, Morgoth realized orcs alone were inadequate to defeat the Noldor, thus he began developing dragons. Concurrently came the three houses of men to Beleriand. Morgoth sought to divide these new enemies, dispatching an orc raid stealthily over Ered Linden to attack the House of Haleth. The Haladins established the Gelion Askar stockade, and Morgoth put it under siege. Holding out until they had almost succumbed to starvation, Haldad and his son Haldar sortied against the orcs and perished. Nearing victory, Caranthir arrived on the scene and saved the surviving men. Although defeated, Morgoth did manage to force the people of Haleth to isolate themselves further and not participate in the war on a large scale, similar to the Lyquendi. In FA 455, Morgoth gathered his strength and unleashed multiple armies led by Glaurung and presumably also Sauron and Gothmog. In the northeast, Dothonion was overrun, with Aegnor, Angrod and countless from the House of Beor slain in the fighting. In the northwest, Hithlum was successfully defended, but many of the House of Hador perished. Morgoth's forces breached the pass of Aglon, captured Maglor's Gap, and encroached into eastern Beleriand. Meanwhile, Sauron established the advanced outpost of Tolin Gorgoth. Fingolfin alone rode to Angband, challenging Morgoth to single combat. He would die in the duel that followed. Morgoth had broken the siege of Angband and slew many elven leaders. His forces could now roam throughout northern Beleriand. Yet many of his enemies' kingdoms remained hidden to him, and his forces had taken heavy losses. Morgoth's enemies utilized the Dark Lord's weakened position to seize the initiative, forming the Union of Maedhros and assaulting Angband before he could divide and conquer them one by one. As cunning as ever, Morgoth managed to divide them still, secretly seducing Ulfang to his camp. The Union planned to lure out Morgoth's forces against their eastern army, but instead, Morgoth managed to lure out the western army. Enraged, the forces of men broke through the gates of Angband and fell into a trap. Within his fortress, Morgoth's forces slaughtered countless humans, before the Dark Lord unleashed his secret reserves. Wolves, wolf riders, balrogs and dragons, led by Glaurung, stormed out to unleash chaos upon the ranks of mankind. Despite the incredible strength, Morgoth could have still lost the battle if it were not for Ulfang's betrayal, forcing Maedhros to fight a three-front battle. Glaurung slew Azagol, forcing the dwarves of Belegost to retire and not play a larger role in the war. Gothmog, leading the western host, slew Fingon and captured Húrin. Morgoth had inflicted massive casualties upon his enemies, and now could move even more freely in Beleriand. The Dark Lord placed the Easterlings in Hithlum as a buffer state, and set to work conquering his enemies one by one. Morgoth's smiths, miners and masters of fire erected siege engines to break and seize Barad Nimraz, Rithombar and Eglarest, effectively ejecting the Falathrim from the war. Then, during the Battle of Tumhalad, Morgoth discovered the location of Nargothrond. In FA 495, Glaurung led an orc host to attack Nargothrond. Glaurung's fire breath proved an effective siege weapon, breaking the doors of Felagund and allowing the orcs to sack the city. After this, Morgoth captured the elf Maeglin, who helped him locate and gain access to Gondolin. In FA 510, Morgoth besieged the city with armies of orcs, wolves, balrogs and dragons. In the battle that followed, Gothmog and Glorfindel slew each other in single combat. Thus, Morgoth lost one of his highest-ranking marshals. Despite this, Gondolin fell to his forces. After this victory, Morgoth had finally won dominion over Beleriand, or so he thought. Unbeknownst to him, Eärendil survived the fall of Gondolin and went to Valinor, rallying the host of the Valar. In FA 545, the War of Wrath began. Morgoth's greatest fear had come true. The enemy was now fully united. Morgoth unleashed his full strength against his confederated foes, throwing all he had at them, including the massive Dreadworm and Calagon the Black. Morgoth faced his greatest enemy, the alliance of all against him. Undivided, the host of the Valar defeated Morgoth, casting him through the Door of Night. In the end, Morgoth needed his enemies divided to be victorious. He alienated the Valar from the Noldor, some Noldor from the Sindar, and Easterlings from the Edain. Yet, rather ironically, to create these divisions, he had to create vast armies, and this divided his strength, as the creations were imbued with his power. In a war of attrition, Morgoth's strategy of divide and conquer won him countless battles, but in the end, the war was won when his enemies finally rallied all together, for Morgoth could not face the entirety of them alone. More videos on the histories and cultures of Middle-earth are on the way. To ensure you don't miss them, please subscribe and make sure you have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking and sharing as it helps immensely, and don't forget to comment. We'll try to read and respond to every comment, as we want to know what you think about this video and which videos you hope to see in the future. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.